I think it was fundamentally, I just didn't know who I was, where my place in the world was. I was lost.
This is the Knocking Doors Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knocking Doors Down is all about.
Helen, thank you for joining me on Knocking Doors Down. We do have a common friend, Dr. Rob Kelly, so we'll get into some of that, maybe how you came to know him. But let's kind of start with what really was your area of substance or substances that you were abusing.
Started off very much with cigarettes from a very early age, moving swiftly into alcohol. Actually, alcohol came into my life first, admittedly.
How old were you?
Probably 9 years old when I started raiding cupboards and thinking this stuff is good.
What was going on at home that at 9 years old you started dabbing into alcohol?
Sadly, I suffered a lot of emotional abuse from my mother, who is sadly no longer with us, but she did her best, but she had her own issues, that's for sure. And I just wish now that she was still around, because I really feel I could have helped her lead a happy life, because I don't believe she ever found true happiness in anything.
So was it a single parent household?
It was, with other men that came in as father figure, but that emotionally for me, my emotional needs were not met.
You say other men, was it just kind of a revolving door for your mom, maybe looking for, like you said, that happiness external of herself in a partner or whatever it may be?
Yeah, don't get me wrong, they were largely long-term relationships. It wasn't sort of a new man every week.
Right.
So it could have been worse. And she did have some lovely partners who did become that father figure. One she married, who I was very close to. Sadly, we lost him to cancer. Again, he struggled with addiction for many years, but an awful lot of the same mental damages that we all have suffered from. And yeah, he was an inspiration, though. Yeah. He really was.
So we're 9 years old. We're dabbling into alcohol. Did it become something regular at that point, or did it kind of more escalate as you entered your teen years and early 20s?
It escalated really in my late teens. It became a regular occurrence in my mid-teens. I think my mother quite enjoyed the fact when I was 16 that she could offer me a gin and tonic to have with her at 6 o'clock in the evening. Bang on.
I don't know. You tell me. Us addicts, we always find running mates, don't we?
We do. She didn't have a problem with alcohol, but she acted out in other ways.
What were some of those ways that maybe were displayed?
Shopping was her, and spending money was her activity of choice, for better words.
Yeah, it's tough. I a lot of us or people in general, I know that we shed a lot of light, and I'm sure primarily the work that you're doing is with someone, people with substance abuse. But I mean, goodness, we can be addicted to gambling, to love and sex, to shopping, there's numerous things that people can definitely become affixed on to try to fill voids.
Sadly, I was a bit of her addiction as well. She became at times in between partners that she was pretty much codependent on me, and I largely had to be the adult in the relationship.
That's something that I hear a lot. I know with the work you're doing now in recovery, do you hear a lot of, I know the term I've heard is emotional incest, where the child becomes like the parent like you. Do you run across that a lot too? And how do you share your experience that with people that have?
I'm very open about it. But there were times when she was particularly low. She definitely suffered depression, but she was emotionally damaged herself for so many years. And having gone through a similar depression myself, I can really understand her now. She would say, "Oh, I'm going up to have a bath. Can you come up and talk to me?" I guess she wanted that ear to talk to, and it was completely inappropriate, really. Her crying in the bath about her woes and her worries.
And that's a lot to take on as a child.
Yeah, well, that started at a very young age. And quite frankly, that's child abuse.
Yeah, it really is. And people don't understand that. That is, a job as a parent is to do the nurturing, not the other way around.
Yeah, it's something I'm very aware of with my children.
Go ahead.
Mummy
Sorry.
can feel sad. Mummy can have problems, but everything can be worked through.
Now, when you mentioned that you are a parent, how many children do you have?
I have 2 children from when I was married. I have one of each, luckily. The perfect pair.
Same. Now, being that you mentioned divorce, now did your addiction issues result in this divorce?
I was abusing alcohol all the way through my marriage and for considerable time before.
How did
The
you?
abuse really started in my 20s.
What was it that really kind of spiked off in your 20s? I found for me, of course, when our brain starts to come to maturation, 25, 26 years old, that's kind of when the wheels fell off for me, so to speak.
I think it was fundamentally, I just didn't know who I was, where my place in the world was. I was lost.
Were you, did you find that you were a people pleaser? That was one of my biggest defects that I really had to work on and will continue to.
Sadly, I became very controlling and codependent as well.
Did you have struggles, like you said, being lost, which I can relate to, but holding down a job, staying consistent with that, relationships, friendships coming and going frequently, a lot of the patterns, kind of lay out a lot of your addiction when you think you were at the peak, if you could?
Yeah, well, the peak definitely came after my illness and divorce. And I lost my mother a few months after my divorce as well. She succumbed to cancer, as sadly so many people do.
What illness were you faced with?
I suffered a major stroke when I was 36.
Oh, goodness. And was it a result of the alcohol abuse?
No, I had a hole in my heart, which we never knew anything about. And it was just bad luck that there happened to be a blood clot going past the hole in a millisecond that it was open. And bang, it should have been lights out.
Was that kind of a point of awakening for you after that you wanted to confront some of these issues? Almost, I don't know if you've done 12-step work or what kind of your path is, but we talk a lot about that spiritual awakening. Was that maybe a moment for you that it was like something is giving me a bigger chance to continue forward here?
I wouldn't say it was a turning point, but I do remember sitting in hospital realizing that I was alive for a reason and I was going to make the best of life that I could. But then it had to get a lot worse to get better.
What was the lot worse for you?
Well, really, when my drinking came to a head and my depression just fell through the floor, because I suffered postnatal depression with both my children. But I got signed off work for a year with anxiety and depression. But doctors normally figured out that it was actually the drink that was causing the anxiety and the depression. And of course, as I was off work, I was drinking more.
Did you find that after sobriety, it's interesting you bring up anxiety and depression, because there's still things I suffer with. And granted, I've had good gaps of sobriety, then fell off. Matter of fact, as of this recording would be 16 months ago. I still kind of suffer from it. Do you have any of those still struggles, or did sobriety really kind of clear it up, anxiety and depression for you?
I've done a lot of other work as well, really healing in here and from within. I mentioned my lack of emotional connection within myself.
And what is some of the work that maybe you did to kind of, well, we don't necessarily rectify those things, but come to a place of understanding of self on that?
Yes. And we have everything we need within us to go out into this world and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have anxiety for a reason, naturally for a reason to an extent. But when we're probably not emotionally connected in the right way, and our emotional needs not being met, then we're completely unsettled. Well, that certainly was the case for me, and working with a number of clients where the healing has to come from within. You've got to really work out where the kinks are from inside to get those ironed out, to then have a stronger structure.
Yeah.
Because we all are quick to think about our physical health, and we talk more about our mental health, but what about our emotional health?
What are some of those things that you work on? Well, that you started with for emotional health, and now being in the recovery field that you work with clients, is there any maybe helpful tools or primary areas that you've just seen amazing results?
Being connected from within and with others, we've got to look for our innate needs as a human, and also make the best of how the human brain has developed from the animal world.
Sure.
We're lucky to have a logical brain to use. Okay, that gets bypassed when we're in fight and flight mode, and it's being able to recognize, to actually, because we go so into black and white thinking.
But you said something interesting about anxiety as a tool. I've heard people say that, but what do you mean by that?
Well, if you go back to the cavemen, obviously they had to be on high alert in case there was a saber-toothed tiger hiding outside the cave, waiting to pounce. So if there's a rustle in the bush, you've got to spring into action.
Right.
And I know times of my life that I have become anxious. It probably has been a gut reaction to something that isn't right. So let's find out what it is. What
are some methods maybe to start to identify that anxiety a little bit better? So I know for me and people that have said that they suffer from anxiety as well, it really brings on that sense of hopelessness. What are maybe some of the tools that you use or have used personally to help identify that anxiety and use it as a tool as opposed to a hindrance?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that there's an alarm going off for a reason, and to take a look, as our dear friend Rob says, trauma is always at the root of it all. So let's get to that trauma. Let's talk about it. Let's not rake over it and make you feel inflicted again. But for me, I had to dampen it down greatly, that it isn't a big threat.
Yeah, it seems like a real challenge that a lot of people that suffer from anxiety is that it isn't a big threat, and maybe not digging down into the trauma. What for you, obviously, with the emotional trauma, how did you start to unravel that really?
understanding that my mother was doing her very best, forgiveness, and to realize that, yeah, other people have their own problems. What had she been through?
Generational
There's
trauma
got
is
to be
real.
some compassion and some love there.
Yeah, generational trauma is I think we're finally starting that conversation, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think a real shining light in that world is Gabor Mate, who I just think is unbelievable. I'm always there as a cheerleader for anything I see of his.
I agree. He's for people that maybe don't know, look up Gabor Mate. An amazing individual in the work that he's doing now. Obviously, you're saying a cheerleader for his work. What have you taken away from things that maybe you've learned through the work that he's doing?
Just that trauma can just completely tear your life apart. You can have the best life in the world. You can have millions of dollars in the bank, and it makes no difference whatsoever. We will all come out with the same hurts and the same pain. And I think it's really interesting how he has, I wouldn't know if discovered is the right word, but the links to illnesses such as cancer. And okay, not everyone who has been through trauma becomes an addict or gets cancer or anything like that, but just having a voice out there that really does say, look, trauma is a major factor in all of this.
Yeah.
And emotions can be traumatizing.
Absolutely, especially when we endure situations where, like you mentioned, the fight or flight mode is so constantly activated. It's hard to take our brain out of scenarios and realize that we're in a safe setting, or we have a sense of community, or trust can be built with someone that, and most of all, we can trust ourselves. That's a really difficult one.
Yeah, and you've got to come to a peaceful place within yourself. Something I struggled with for years, having hated everything about myself, low self-esteem, and not necessarily lacking in confidence, but just had nothing within me.
Have you found any addict that says anything to the contrary?
No. And having worked, there's a recent client, and yeah, it was a bit of a difficult conversation when we started talking about self-esteem, because they've achieved a lot, fantastic business, very gregarious, high achiever, but underneath it all, there is a very hurt, damaged person. And as soon as we started building from that, started to turn some massive corners, and this inner strength started pouring out.
And what are those things that you employed to have them start to build self-esteem? Because it's a really tough thing to work on.
It is, but really looking at what he had achieved in life and giving him the recognition, and again going back to perhaps when there were times in his earlier life where he had been quite hurt and damaged by those that should have been the ones that had built him up. And again, it's going back to emotional needs. And with my own children now, it's just I'm hot on it, that because I think if their emotional needs are met, then hopefully they won't get all what I had to go through, and hopefully not have 40 odd years of living in hell, quite frankly. And their behavior, even just recently, we've turned a corner, especially times that used to be very, very difficult. we just don't have that kind of negative energy, because as just human beings, they're getting recognized and listened to and loved no matter what.
Yeah.
And I know as parents we do try to do that, and indeed my mother tried to do her best, but occasionally she dropped the ball. She tried to make up for it in other ways, and I don't think those were necessarily the right ways, or they weren't for me.
Yeah.
Okay, going through a period with a pre-teen, though, is a whole new ball game.
Absolutely. Why do you say so, Helen?
Well, she's no longer a little girl.
Yeah. I'm being faced with that myself.
Oh, we'll have to swap notes.
Absolutely. I could definitely use some advice as a single father for sure. But I think it's so, on one hand, I love watching my kids grow, and I wouldn't say I feel something within myself, but there is a bit of vicariousness that you get out of it. But boy, the things that our youth are being faced with is unfathomable. I don't know that I would have had those tools at their ages to see how well they manage, or at least hopefully manage.
No, I certainly wouldn't. I thought school was tough, but now I just couldn't bear to think about it.
Yeah.
So I've just got to give them security and the support, and know that they are doing their best, and their time will come where they can do what they want and have what they want. But these are the important years to put those strong building blocks in place without any cracks, so that they can just flourish.
That is the challenge, right? Because we kind of go from a phase in parenthood where, there's so much nurturing and direct caretaking, to now all of a sudden trying to help them build independence. And that is just a challenge in itself, especially when you get a lot of resistance from said child.
Yeah. Now, my kids had to grow up quite quickly because of my illness, and now having to have mum who is disabled, that's a lot to cope with themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think it's really been good for them to have a mother who is disabled, because when they meet other people with disabilities further on in life, they'll be able to relate to them so much better and realize what can be done, not what can't be done.
Yeah, it's definitely creates a space for empathy.
Yes. And again, I'm very open about recovering from addiction, and they're very aware of alcohol, cigarettes, drugs.
So let's talk about when you finally went and started to get help. What was your treatment process for you? Did you go into rehabilitation? Were you a 12-step group person? And what finally took to give you longevity in sobriety?
I suddenly realized I had to, and it really was a bolt out of the blue, that I needed to do something about my drinking, because my depression was so bad. I was suicidal every single day, and it just didn't seem right. And someone that I knew, actually, when they were helping me put out the recycling boxes and the weight of my bottle recycling, she kind of suggested that I may be a bit dependent on alcohol. Well, that was the understatement of the century. But that seed was planted, and it wasn't working for me anymore. We hear stories of people switching their drinks to lessen it, but I was having to up the ante so much that yeah, it just stopped working and it was not enjoyable. That buzz went years before.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It got to that point of ridiculousness where a beer or something, you feel it, and I'm with guys that outweigh me by 200 pounds or something like that, and they're getting nauseous or sick, and I'm like, man, I don't feel a thing.
Yeah. Where's the next one?
Yeah, right. Scary
or
place
where's
to
the
be.
whiskey to wash it down with?
Yeah, exactly.
And perhaps a little bit of my maternal instinct kicked in, remembering that what I'd gone through with my stroke to survive, to be a mother to them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was about ready to take myself out.
Yeah.
And I'd be sat there with my bottles around me in the evening, with them asleep upstairs, planning on how I was going to do it.
Well, I'm glad you didn't, Helen, and I'm glad you're here to spread the message.
So am I. And then I knew a friend of mine was in a 12-step group around us, and I phoned her up and I said, I think I've got the same problem as you. And she said, do this test online and phone me back. And I was so excited that I got 100%. It's like, I passed. But it was a complete light bulb moment. I thought, oh, it was so nice to have that answer that, yes, I did have a problem. No one could have told me. And that's how I started. And then it was about 2 years into my sobriety through the 12-step work that I just felt I wanted to go deeper. And that is when I crossed paths with our mutual friend. Because for me, I just felt something was a lot deeper, and he was the man to uncover it for me.
Yeah, speaking about Dr. Rob Kelly, who's just a wonderful, wonderful man.
Yeah, Dr. Rob, if you are listening, you are just the best. Well, for now. And then from then, I've just picked up any book that's relevant to further my knowledge. And I know that a lot of people think knowledge won't keep you sober. Well, it has helped keep this lady sober. And it has strengthened myself to then help others more.
And I agree with you. It's all about education.
Yes, and I've just started to put myself through a further training. I don't know if it's really sort of come through to you over there on the other side of the pond.
I'm not sure.
The human givens,
Mm-mm.
again, it's very based around the emotional needs. I will send you a link of a book on anxiety that I'm part way through, and it is fascinating.
Okay.
But depression, anxiety, addiction, they're very intertwined, as you will learn. And no, I'm not here to do a big promo for them, but as I said, I am starting to go through their diploma to become one of their therapists. So watch this space. I'll come knocking on your door, and then I will be.
So at what point then in your sobriety, how far along for you when you decided to become a recovery coach yourself?
That was about 2.5 years in, and Dr. Rob, who we have really built up a very good rapport, he told me about his training that he was rolling out, and we kind of thought together, let's get this done. He knew I had a passion for helping others, and being a single mother, I felt it was definitely my area to move into. Again, going against a lot of others that think, yeah, it should always be free. But when you are paying fees and running a business, you can't.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have that expectation, but as even Dr. Rob told me, well, and you're good at what you do. There's nothing wrong for making a living from it.
Absolutely. And yeah, the free options will always be there. But for some people, that doesn't work either. I've got a client at the moment and it wasn't for them. And that's okay. And that's why we do have to have other options out there.
If people want to know more about you, Helen, what you're doing, how do they find you?
I'm on Facebook under Helen Bratton, or Disaddicted is my business name. And website is disaddicted.coach.
Awesome.
Not a .com, not a .co.uk, .coach.
I love it. That's great. Well, Helen, before I leave you with the final words, how about some fun random questions so we can know a little bit more about you?
Why not?
All right. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
To fly.
Why flying?
Because I think it would just be amazing, just be able to jump out of a window and go to where you want to go.
I agree. I'm kind of over airports.
Yeah, and just be able to sprout my own wings and just go and not have to rely on fuel.
So let's say you write a book about your life and they decide to turn it into a movie or a TV show. Who would you love to see play you?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be Angelina Jolie because I don't have the cheekbones.
It could be anyone. It could be anyone in history of acting. Maybe there's somebody you just love.
Sophia Loren.
Oh, I'm with you on that. That would be great.
Yeah, she is a proper woman.
Yeah, I always found her to be so classy as myself.
Classy with curves.
I love it. If you had a recommendation for anyone for, let's pick like 2 or 3 books, what would you throw out there for people? Just stuff that you've gotten value out of.
Daddy, Please Stop Drinking by Dr. Rob Kelly. I'm going to recommend my book that's beside me, and that is Human Given's A New Approach to Emotional Health and Clear Thinking. It's a life-changing book that will stop us squandering our natural inheritance, by Joe Griffin and Ivan Terrell.
Sounds fascinating. All right.
It is fascinating.
Okay, if you were on a deserted island, but for whatever reason you could watch a movie and listen to music, but you could only take one movie and one music album or musician with you, what would those be?
I would have to take the greatest collection of either Beethoven or Queen.
Oh, 2 of my favorites. Awesome. My kids are really into Beethoven right now.
Oh, we just always have classical music on. It's so good for the brain.
So you have a love for Queen, one of my all-time favorites. How when did you kind of fall in love with the music of Queen?
It was one of my mother's favorites, so it was something that was on regularly in our house.
Yeah, moms seem to have that power, don't they?
They do.
Okay, so we got music, but what movie would you have with you if you were on a deserted island?
Okay, it's going to sound a bit daft, but this was a conversation the kids and I were having earlier. And I'd probably take The Sound of Music.
Oh, how could
because
you?
Because it's so uplifting. You can have a good sing to, or maybe even Mary Poppins for similar reasons.
Sure.
And my son was watching that earlier, the original.
Oh, yeah. You got to go with the original.
You got to go with the original.
Yeah. No, Julie Andrews was a staple in my household as a child. My mom had Sound of Music on so much that eventually I got tired of it. But now when I hear it, it makes me smile.
Yeah, just gorgeous. And those hills, I'm a real sucker for the Alps anyway.
Oh, that was going to be a next question. What are some of the things that you do for self-enrichment? Sounds like outdoor activities is one of them.
Well, obviously, I'm very limited now,
Mm-hmm.
but I used to ski a lot, and it wasn't about tackling the steepest run or the biggest moguls. It was just taking in the scenery and the beauty of the world, really. Now, for my self-enrichment, it's all largely more to do with the kids, and be it taking them for out and about, obviously me more on my mobility scooter, more spending time with my cats as well. They really add something to my life. And reading and learning. My time out largely does, Mummy's taken herself time out, but Mummy's actually probably gone to write an article or something. So work actually offers so much to me. I love catching up with my clients and spending time with them to see them grow and change, and then getting feedback from people that have seen them, and you get to hear how much they see a change.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, seeing other people get something different out of them. And a very dear client of mine, when we started working together, she had to give up 2 of her children.
Mm.
It was necessary for her to get well. They stayed within the family, and we said 2 years and they'll be back. And you know what? Next month, they're coming back home to Mama.
I love it. That's so awesome.
Which just gives me such joy for all of them.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of healing still going on. But yeah, that is just seeing those miracles happen.
Helen, if I like to leave the guests with the last words, if there's any words of encouragement that you can give to anyone that might be struggling with substance abuse or anything, what might that be?
Just feel that you have been born with everything within you. Obviously, you've got your physical needs, your mental needs, but please don't forget about your emotional needs. They've all got to be nurtured, and you have a strength within you that you probably have never even felt. And you will get through it. You will be loved, you will be supported, and live your next life, because it will be better than the last.